Final Destination franchise, 5 horror movies in which the killer is death itself. In this video we will be diving into the deeper themes and symbolism of these films. It's a journey that will take us to some deeply disturbing places. But on the far side of all that, there's something else. There's all of us are born into this world in such a way that no matter what we do, one day, somehow, we're going to die.
We're biological entities, and death is just the end of biological function. It's as simple as that.
So what's the big deal?
No harm, no foul.
The Final Destination movies wake us up to our own mortality, but more than that, they invite us to have a problem with it. What if death isn't merely the end of biological life, but rather a vicious enemy, the ultimate enemy? In some ways this is nothing new. There's a long tradition of personifying death, if not explicitly then implicitly. In horror movies, death is often represented as a masked killer or a monster, a lethal agent of chaos that enters the story. But Final Destination commits to keeping death as an unseen presence. Aside from the occasional blurry reflection, we are never shown the character of death across the 5 films. No, what we see are his effects. The average person in the Final Destination universe experiences reality just as we do. For the most part, they don't even suspect that there's anything sinister going on. Death happens, and that's that. But occasionally, certain characters get a glimpse behind the curtain, and they discover that death is in fact a conscious entity pulling the strings in the background. The protagonists of these films are the people who are waking up to what's really going on. Be warned, from now on there will be spoilers for all 5 films. Let's take a look at the format of a typical Final Destination movie. 1. Young person has a premonition of a big explosive event, resulting in large loss of human life. 2. Young person is sufficiently disturbed by said premonition to get out of harm's way, along with some friends. Yay! But this creates a wrinkle in reality, because these people who were meant to die in the big incident are now alive. 3. Young person discovers that death is now killing off the survivors in the order that they would have died in the accident, and along the way there are signs and mini premonitions revealing who will die next and how. 4. Young person and friends attempt to thwart death's design, with apparent success. 5. Young person's relationship with a partner of the opposite sex is tested but ultimately strengthened. But 6. Death has the last laugh, and very rarely do any of the characters survive into the next movie. Now, I spell those out not to accuse the sequels of being too formulaic. I actually think it's part of their power. With each movie we see fresh characters coming up against the old enemy. Maybe this time it will be different. Maybe this time they'll crack the code and defeat death. But every time, without fail, death comes knocking. For all of them. The drama of each Final Destination movie is brought about by an interplay between 3 different influences. There's death itself and its design, which is obviously seeking to kill. Then there's premonition, information given from above through visions and physical signs revealing clues about death's activity. And then there's intervention, characters acting in response to the premonitions in order to try and thwart or work with death's design.
In death, there are no accidents, no coincidences, no mishaps, and no escapes.
This is William Bloodworth, a mortician who appears in Final Destination 1, 2 and 5. He spent a lot of time around death.
What you have to realize is that we're all just a mouse that a cat has by the tail. Every single move we make, from the mundane to the monumental, the red light that we stop at or run, the people we have sex with or won't with us, the airplanes that we ride or walk out of. It's all part of death's sadistic design, leading to the grave.
In the films, for the young characters who take their predicament seriously, they are wise to listen to this man's advice. As the ancient Hebrew text of Ecclesiastes says, "The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of pleasure." It is at the morgue that these characters learn a degree of wisdom, the House of Mourning. But of course, throughout the franchise, we also see people who choose to burn through their final days in the House of Pleasure.
If you're right about this whole crash thing, then I'm going to make the most of every moment I have left. So I'm going to do what I do best. I'm going to go get laid.
For now, let's stick with the faithful few, the characters who take death seriously. Something they need to learn very quickly is that their reality is far stranger and more interconnected than they first thought. There are signs everywhere, mini premonitions revealing clues about what death will do next, and our characters need to learn how to read the signs, like learning a new language, the language of symbolism. As I'm always quoting on this channel, a symbol is a fact, a tangible object that embodies higher meaning. It's a simple but vital concept. The physical everyday objects in the Final Destination universe aren't merely physical everyday objects. They are revealing a design, albeit a depressing one. You see it from the very beginning of the first film. The camera prowls around Alex Browning's bedroom, lingering on props which foreshadow the coming destruction. The spinning propeller of this fan foreshadows the central disaster of the movie, the plane explosion. And this hanging figurine foreshadows the bathroom strangulation of Alex's best friend, Todd. The film is full of symbols like this, physical objects which convey meaning. For most of human history, the universe has been treated this way. A physical creation which expresses a higher purpose. Of course, views about what the higher purpose actually is widely differ, and I'm not saying the films get that right, but the view that there is meaning being expressed through the world around us, that view is almost universal around the world and down through history. I say almost because in my cultural context we have a post-Enlightenment understanding which tries to divorce matter from meaning. We tend to think that the world is nothing more than a collection of physical particles clacking together, and therefore meaning, if there is any, exists in a different realm. You can see this divorce of meaning and matter in the sculpture built by Alex's unlikely friend, Clear Waters.
Do you know what this is?
This is Who's the springy head guy?
It's you. Not a likeness. It's how you make me feel, Alex.
I'm sorry.
No, like you, the sculpture doesn't even know what or why it is. It's reluctance to take form, and you're creating an absolute but incomprehensible attraction. 4 years of high school, we haven't said one word to each other. At that moment on the plane, I felt what you felt.
This is what a lot of our postmodern art is like, isn't it? We have a sense that there might be an idea out there somewhere, a deeper meaning to life, but we now find ourselves unable to express it in any tangible way. We no longer have a story that can integrate the meaning with the matter. Anyway, she tried, and the point is, both her and Alex are waking up to the fact that there is something deeper going on. There's a design.
Does that mean if you figure out the design, you can cheat death?
Alex, you've already done that by walking off the plane. Your friend's departure shows that death has a new design for all of you.
Because death wants to remain hidden, it can't do anything too outlandish. For instance, if it kept using meteors falling from the sky to kill its targets, that would look too suspicious. More and more people would wake up to its design and the fact that it's a conscious being. So instead, death goes incognito, using elaborate chain reactions involving everyday objects to bring about the grisly ends of its victims, such that it always looks like a freak accident. These lethal chain reactions almost always begin with a small breeze. Wind. An impulse to get things moving. And in fact, in the fourth film, just before disaster strikes, we hear the melody of the theme for Gone with the Wind. What is that sound? Maybe death is coming for me. Anyway, yes, wind. In the Hebrew Bible, the word for wind and breath is the same as the word for spirit, ruach. It might be possible to see the character of Death in the Final Destination films as a single evil spirit acting locally, a particular agent of Death among many others. However, the slightly tactless references to Abraham Lincoln and 9/11 in Final Destination 3 seem to frame him as a personification of all death, personally responsible for each and every demise in human history. Apparently the signs were there all along.
That's the last photograph Lincoln posed for. The photographic plate was broken, causing a line that can't be removed. Exactly where he was shot. Look, see the shadow?
Whoa, when did this film come out again? 2006. Okay. So, we've seen that death uses brutal chain reactions to kill a person when they're next on its list. But the cruel irony is that if it's not yet your turn, death will actually protect you. Sometimes characters in these films try to take their own lives, to go out on their own terms. But if it's not yet their time, the effort is futile.
You don't keep it loaded?
Maybe they're all duds. 6 in a row? Never. That's impossible.
It wasn't his turn to die.
And here's something else we see. Early on in these movies, when the characters don't yet know how to thwart death's design, any knowledge they do have starts to become a burden rather than a blessing. If you were next in line to see death, how much would you want to know?
Out of us, who's next to see it? You have a responsibility to tell me.
You think it's gonna make it easier to know, Carter? Huh? It's not. It's gonna make it f***ing harder.
It doesn't matter who's next. Because we're all on the same list, all of us.
We also see this in Final Destination 3. Kevin is offered the chance to see a photo with clues about the circumstances of his own death, but he refuses.
No, I don't want to see mine. No. Seriously, if there's any way to beat this thing, I gotta stay focused, and if I look at that picture, all I'm gonna do is obsess. So, you know what? No, I don't want to see it.
This gets us into questions of free will. Does knowing the future cause you to change the future? Well, the overwhelming sense in these films is that resistance to death is impossible. Ultimately, there's nothing you can do to thwart it. But to keep the stories engaging, they always have to give the characters some sense of hope that it's worth trying. And this brings in our third influence, intervention. In the first film, Alex becomes convinced that it might be possible to get death to skip people on its list, if you intervene just as it's about to strike. And it seems to work.
I saved him! And because I saved him, it skipped Carter and went to the next person in the path of the explosion, Billy. I have to see it. And if I see it, then I intervene. And if I intervene, I cheat the design.
This culminates with Alex making the ultimate intervention. He lays down his own life in order to save Clear, the woman that he now loves. It's an emotionally resonant scene, but does his sacrifice work? Now, these films have been made by a culture which has been meditating on the Christian story for centuries. The story of Jesus, the God who pours out his life on the cross so that his bride, his people, might have life. Whether we believe it or not, that story has profoundly transformed our view of heroism. We now recognise the hero as the one who lays down his life for his friends. The natural way of things is survival of the fittest, but the cross subverts that entirely. On the cross we see the strongest sacrificing himself for the sake of the weakest. And because we've been stewing in that story for so long, it makes sense that so many of our movies depict self-sacrificial heroes who reflect Christ in some small way. As Antonio Garcia Martinez says, the Western mind is like a tuning fork calibrated to one frequency, the Christ story. Hit it with the right Christ figure, and it'll just hum deafeningly in resonance. Whether it's intentional or not, Alex becomes a miniature Christ figure in his act of self-sacrifice. And miraculously he makes it through this grappling with death. So far, so good. We then have this scene around the table with Alex, Clear and Carter, and it would have been the traditional way to end such a movie. The hero has returned, he's united with the woman he loves, there's a feast, and even their former bully, Carter, is now a friend. A happy ending, right?
If you would have told me 6 months ago that the three of us would be sitting here having a drink.
Yeah.
This scene sets a precedent for every Final Destination movie to come. A moment where the characters think they've succeeded. They've done it. They figured out death's design and cheated it.
We beat it. We won.
But here's the cruel postmodern twist. It's not over.
I told you were next. And it just skipped me. So who's next?
Turns out their interventions changed the order, but death is still hot on their heels. Death gets the last laugh. Even the glorious act of self-sacrifice, inspired by the central image in our cultural memory, even that is shown to be utterly ineffective in these films. Just another failed intervention. Now, I think the Final Destination movies are able to take the cynical approach that they take, partly because of their darkly comedic tone, but also because their view of what it means to defeat death is lacking. In these films, there is no sense of life beyond death, and therefore the best you can do is postpone death. The best you can do is survive into old age.
We won.
I think the only thing we won, Carter, is a chance at a full life. A chance that I won't ever waste.
Final Destination 2 begins with another terrible accident, a pile-up. But because of a premonition given to our new protagonist, Kimberly, she survives, along with some others. And so, once again, death is seeking to smooth the wrinkle in reality. But this time, it kills in reverse, the opposite order to the one that would have happened in the crash.
Being alive after we were supposed to die, it caused an outward ripple, a rift in death's design.
So, if you had never gotten off the plane, we wouldn't be alive in the first place.
Yes, that's why death is working backwards. It's tying up all the loose ends, sealing the rift once and for all.
Everything is connected. Because Alex and his friends survived longer than intended in the first film, that led to a whole new set of interactions, and other lives saved. And now, death is acting to seal the rift. This is a bit like the doctrine of original sin. The head of the river was poisoned, and now everyone downstream faces the consequences of this curse. The question is, does the film have any hope of salvation? Well, we'll get to that. Notice the return of Clear Waters, the only survivor from the central cast of the first movie, and she goes on an interesting journey in Final Destination 2. When we first encounter her, she has voluntarily confined herself to a padded cell in an asylum. It's the nuclear option for protecting herself from death. But Kimberly doesn't think much of it as a strategy.
You know what?
What?
I think you're a coward. You hide out in here because you're too damn bitter and selfish to help any other person. In my opinion, you're already dead.
Ouch. Eventually, Clear does venture out in order to help Kimberly and the others. She is given fresh hope by a new possibility of cheating death.
Some people say there's a balance to everything. For every life, there's a death. For every death, there is a life. But the introduction of life that was not meant to be, that could invalidate the list. Force death to start anew.
If there was a pregnant woman in a white delivery van.
If she gives birth to a baby that would have died in that car crash, a brand new soul that was never part of death's design.
It throws the whole list out of whack and we start over with a clean slate.
Sounds promising, right? They find the pregnant woman, Isabella, and miraculously her baby is born. It's a Christmas movie. But then Kimberly discovers through another premonition that Isabella was never meant to die in the pile-up. So the birth of her baby isn't going to save them. All hell breaks loose, finally claiming the life of Clear Waters. And Kimberly saves the day by sacrificing herself. She is medically dead for a moment, but then she is revived. Will we get a happy ending this time? Of course not. It's Final Destination. But here's the thing, if Isabella had been on death's list from the pile-up, would the birth of her baby have made a difference? Maybe. But in any case, the best that can happen, as we've said, is that death is postponed. It's still coming for everyone, eventually. Final Destination 2 does bring another thing to the franchise, though. The pigeons. An important symbol. These urban scavengers often carry disease, and they seem to appear throughout the movies as bad omens. Sometimes they're even used within death's sadistic chain reactions. Around the world and down through history, different cultures have had different views about death. In many cases, death has been viewed as something that's fundamental to reality, something that exists in balance with life.
Some people say there's a balance to everything.
In other words, death isn't necessarily a problem, it's just the way things are. That's a pretty common view. But in Final Destination 3, we get a real sense that death is nasty. Not that we didn't in the previous movies, but here we have a young Mary Elizabeth Winstead acting her socks off, and notice how she reacts to the presence of death.
This fear is more than just being scared. It's like a presence. Like a living thing, always with me. It's cold and terrifying. It's not only horrible, but can you feel how vicious it was?
Easy. Okay, easy.
It's cold and terrifying, vicious. The characters in the Final Destination films come to see death not as a mere fact of life, but as a vicious enemy that must be overcome. Now, where did they get that idea? Well, remember, these films are post-Christian, and only just. And Christianity is the religious tradition that truly has a problem with death. As the Bible says, the last enemy to be destroyed is death. Evil and death are very much bound up with each other in Christianity, which is why it's notable that the roller coaster at the start of Final Destination 3 is themed around the devil.
You can run, but you cannot hide.
That's the voice of Tony Todd, who also plays William Bloodworth in these movies. Now, of course, the devil imagery here is primarily for building atmosphere and foreshadowing. The filmmakers aren't trying to say that the villain of the Final Destination films is the devil, and the man who's interviewed on TV at the start of Final Destination 2 says as much.
I believe that there's a sort of force, an unseen, malevolent presence that's all around us every day, and it determines when we live and die. And some people call this force the devil, but I think that whole religious thing is... So I prefer to call it death itself.
But the fact that these films frame death as a sinister enemy, that's a very Christian idea. The question is, if Final Destination has a category for supernatural evil, does it also have a category for supernatural good? In other words, is there a good God in the Final Destination universe? Well, there's a mystery running throughout the franchise as to the origin of the premonitions, these visions from beyond, giving warnings to certain characters about what death will do next. Who or what is sending those premonitions? Well, maybe they are psychic powers which some people happen to possess. They are a minor inconvenience to death because they blow his cover to some people, but ultimately he is able to work around them. That's one possibility. Or maybe the premonitions come from a source of supernatural good, sent to help certain people live a little bit longer. But here's the third possibility, perhaps the most disturbing. What if the premonitions come from death itself? That's what the fourth installment, titled The Final Destination, seems to suggest. In an agonising attempt to spare his friends from a foretold cinema explosion, Nick O'Bannon fights death toe-to-toe. See how his arm is literally being nailed to a wall, somewhat reminiscent of Christ's crucifixion. Here is the hero, laying down his life for his friends. And this time it really does seem to work. He stops the chain reaction, he puts out the fire. But then, in the cafe at the end, this happens.
What if we didn't change anything?
What are you talking about?
What if us being here, right now, was the plan from the beginning?
Crumbs. The disturbing implication here is that these characters never had an ounce of free will. They felt like they did, But really their lives were running on train tracks. They thought they had received the premonitions to help them avoid death, but really they were part of death's means of getting them to this exact moment at this exact time. It couldn't have gone any other way. Looking across the 5 films, this does seem to be the most likely interpretation of what the filmmakers are going for. They seem to have tried to position death as the ultimate power, the god of the Final Destination universe. Final Destination 5 introduces yet another complication to death's design. Sam Lawton and his friends were meant to die on a bridge collapse, but because of Sam's premonition, they survived. And here they ask William for help.
You were supposed to die on that bridge. So you let death have somebody else in your place, and then you take their spot in the realm of the living, all the days and years that they've yet to live. And they take your place in death. Then the books are balanced.
Wait a minute. We kill someone, we get their life?
I don't make the rules.
Whoa. The possibility of working alongside death rather than against it. Disturbing stuff. We almost saw it take place in Final Destination 3 with Ian McKinley.
Oh, no way. Do I cause your death?
You'll save me if you just stay away!
I'm not gonna die! It's you, Wendy! You're dead!
Whoops. But for Peter Friedkin in Final Destination 5, the grief of losing his girlfriend makes him deadly serious. To my mind, this is one of the greatest scenes in the franchise.
Every couple of minutes, an opportunity would just present itself. Did you? No, I didn't. I couldn't kill somebody that didn't deserve to die. Well, none of us deserve to die, then why is it that you deserve to live, Molly? You said it yourself. You don't.
In the ensuing struggle, Sam and Molly make it out alive. The good guys win, and the notion of working for death is condemned by the movie. It seems that all is well as the couple settles down on the flight to Paris. But then we see some commotion a few seats away, and we realise that this is Flight 180 from the first film. Final Destination 5 is a prequel to Final Destination 1. Mind blown. And it's not just a gimmicky plot twist. It turns the whole franchise into a self-negating cycle. These films depict a reality in which everything is handed over to death, like a snake eating its own tail. And so it makes sense that Final Destination 5 flows into 1. You just go round the loop again and again. There's something complete about its destruction. It will be interesting to see what happens with the upcoming instalment, Final Destination Bloodlines. So there we go, Final Destination. It takes a cynical, postmodern tone, framing death as the ultimate power that always wins. But through the main characters we see something of a Christian-ish impulse. We see shock and outrage at death. We see a yearning for death to be defeated. The films end in tragedy. They twist the knife right at the end as death gets the last laugh. The shock value of these endings comes from the fact that for centuries we have been meditating on a story which does end with death being defeated by the ultimate sacrifice. The films are right in saying that none of us can escape death, but what they don't account for is the possibility that we can die a good death and find something even greater beyond. Watching all 5 movies was a fun experience. It was a ride. They know what they are. They're silly and campy in places, but they're also unexpectedly disturbing. My name is Thomas Thorogood. I get into the deeper meaning of movies. Do subscribe if you'd like to stay in the loop. You can also follow me on Instagram if you like for updates about upcoming projects. And if you'd like to support the channel and get access to bonus content and a chat community, you can check out patreon.com/Thomas Thorogood. Thanks so much for watching, and remember, it's deeper than you think.